Recording live from the Hoban Law Group here in Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Eric Singular. We're sitting alongside President and founder of the Hoban Law Group, Bob Hoban.
Good day, everybody. Coming at you live from the center of the cannabis universe, Suite 420 in the historic Equitable Building in downtown Denver, Colorado. I'm Bob Hoban, your host, alongside Eric Singular, and we are here to talk about a number of things today on this exciting podcast. Eric, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Bob. I'm doing good. Before we get to those things, just as a quick aside, there's been a fire up in Evergreen, Colorado. Give us an update, if you will. Is your house doing okay? You doing okay? Were you really affected?
Yes. No, thank you for asking. So for those listeners that don't reside in Colorado, forest fires, of course, are a major problem especially as our climate gets drier and drier and drier. So there was indeed a fire in Evergreen, Colorado, where I live, and about 1,000 homes were evacuated. And by the way, how you know you get evacuated, because I've been evacuated before, is you get a phone call and your cell phones, et cetera, are registered. So they tell you to get out. And this time it did not affect us from the evacuation perspective, although we were really, really close to the border of that. Over about 24 hours, firefighters worked hard around the clock, put it out, and saved homes, saved lives, and really just worked as efficiently as possible. What was really, really cool about the experience, and you got to see it both at night, the mountainside at night, several miles away, 3-4 miles away, 2-3 miles away. That was impressive, just an impressive scene, particularly because you knew they had it at least largely under control. We got help from rain. We got help from not as sunny, shady conditions. But the helicopters, they went up to our lake. There's a lake in the center of downtown Evergreen, and they put this pump, this hose, this siphon into the water, and they're hovering inches above the water, and they'd fill it up, and then they'd move on to the next and drop the water. It was really, really interesting to watch that cycle and to just see how hard those people work. But yes, everything is good, but that is unfortunately life in the mountains. Yeah,
well, huge shout out to the firefighters. As you said, forest fires here in Colorado in the summer, I mean, it's just a prevalent issue, and talk about essential, the work that those guys do. Let's talk about a topic that is seldom discussed between you and I, and really in general on the Hoban Minute, but is not completely unrelated, and that is psychedelics. And I know that recently here at the Hoban Law Group, a new practice area was formed with the help of Noah Potter, distinguished psychedelic attorney. And maybe you can speak to that a little bit before we dive into some of the more what questions we might have about what psychedelic legalization could look like in the time to come.
Well, yeah, certainly. So you mentioned Noah. Noah Potter is one of the finest attorneys in the land, based in New York City, and has been an attorney with our firm for a number of years now. Has been a valuable resource to numerous clients. But one of Noah's passions as an attorney is the idea of psychedelic law. And he understands it perhaps as deeply as certainly as anyone that I know or that I've met, in terms of the depth of the UN Convention and the historical treatment of psilocybin, for example, is what we talk about primarily when we talk about psychedelics as a plant-based outlet. But Noah has brought that experience to the table, and we've determined, based on client feedback, that there are folks from the investment side that are looking at investing in both the IP elements of what you can do with psilocybin and other mushroom blends, similar to how we view cannabis genetics, looking at how to create formulas and run that through various elements of what I'd call clinical trials, registrations in numerous jurisdictions, not just in North America, but around the world. So there's an IP, there's a sophisticated angle to it that aims towards medicinal categories, despite the fact that psilocybin is indeed a Schedule I substance like marijuana. Then on the other side of the game, you've got the notion that You could sell psilocybin as it's been decriminalized in many places, maybe not in a regulated environment, but maybe in a regulated environment in the near future, where it's basically over the counter in the same fashion as cannabis, buying mushrooms. You can do that in Amsterdam. You can do that in Toronto. We haven't seen that on a wide scale, pushing the limits here in the U.S., but it certainly is being pushed. And, there's just odd nuances with the law that Noah always points out about what you can sell and what you can't sell as it relates to psilocybin. And again, this is not what I'm just about to describe is not an accurate portrayal of the law, so nobody should rely on this. But there's distinctions between, like, spores, for example, and then, fully grown or fully mature fungi that is psilocybin. And that creates at least one of a number of so-called loopholes or aggressive readings of the law that would allow people to do certain things today that might otherwise be viewed as, again, it's an aggressive strategy.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned Amsterdam, Toronto, that just the notion that this does exist in some way, shape, or form in other places. It's not a crazy idea. And I think for me, the question that it raises, and I think it raises this question in a lot of people's mind, is this going to be similar to cannabis? And of course, you can draw some similarities and so a comparison, and you can also see some differences. And when we look at how cannabis and marijuana particularly was legalized here in Colorado first, and then we've had this growing wave of states legalizing, we do have decriminalization efforts. We've seen that in a couple of states, I think here in Colorado. So what does this mean? Do you think overall, are we going to see that industry, the psilocybin industry, develop similar to how we've seen the medical or recreational marijuana industry? Or do you think it's going to look kind of different?
Well, several of our clients are betting that it's going to look very similar. But again, there's sort of that two sides to it. As you look at the idea of psilocybin as a treatment for depression. In fact, I believe I read recently that there's actual FDA submitted studies going on for that purpose. The idea of microdosing psilocybin to treat depression, anxiety. These are topics that you read every day from highly successful professionals all over the country and around the world. Does that medicinal benefit, that one alone, does that mean that people are going to want to go buy it over the counter, or they're going to want to go buy a FDA-approved drug that is, contains those active ingredients? Same exact debate with cannabis. Schedule I substance. Do I want to buy it over the counter and consume it through edibles, infused products, oils, or smoking it, vaping it? Or do I want to go to a doctor and get a pill that has, so many milligrams of THC and maybe other cannabinoids therein in a formula? Same challenges present themselves. The interesting thing is with marijuana, what do we see push? Dispensaries, distribution at the state and local level, still in violation of federal law, but over-the-counter marijuana. What we haven't seen a lot of is the development through the FDA of medicines based on cannabinoids. We have Epidiolex, first cannabinoid-based approved medicine with CBD. We have Sativex, which is synthetic. We have Marinol, which is synthetic. There's another drug, which the name escapes me right now, which I do believe is based on a natural compound. But my point is, in a number of years, we've only seen FDA activity on a limited basis. I think it's going to happen the opposite way in psychedelics and in mushrooms. I think you're going to see more people, and our FDA lawyers, our patent lawyers are moving forward, protecting these formulas, protecting this IP, and moving forward as best they can in various clinical, government, interactive environments. That's going to happen. Will cities allow for mushrooms to be sold over the counter like they are in Amsterdam or Toronto? Well, can you see that in Denver? Certainly I can see it, but how receptive will our policymakers be to something that just seems so fast on the heels of cannabis legalization? To many people, it could be perceived as, we're going to hell in a bucket by legalizing all these drugs. I'm not saying that, but I think that there's a generation of people and a whole group of people that are not particularly on board with these natural medications because of the stigma and what they've been taught over the years because of the drug classifications of these products and materials, despite what they can do for humans.
Yeah, no, there's a lot No, there's a lot to consider in there. But thinking back to the conversation that we had earlier today with Jason Ortiz from MCBA, and really just in general thinking about how the war on drugs and the continued war on drugs, the continually keeping some of these substances in the way that they are now classified. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but maybe there is something to learn from other countries that have decriminalized or at least put less emphasis on enforcement of drugs in general. So I don't know. There's a lot there, and we'll continue to watch that unfold.
No, we certainly will. But the point is that there are drugs that have been highly scheduled. Therefore, they've been stigmatized. They've been misconceived in terms of their potential value, and that's affected far too many people's lives. And to your point, disproportionately people that are black and brown have been affected, and opportunities have been taken away. So that seems to be a logical place to start. Not only that, it addresses a social ill, but it addresses an ill, if there is such a thing. It addresses a medical benefit. When you put these things into the marketplace, naturally occurring substances that can help human beings and interact with them, interact with their bodies to produce, increased wellness, just better quality of life. Why are we scared of that?
Oh, absolutely. Let's jump over to a new development as well that came recently, which is Ecuador. Ecuador has followed a trend that we've seen in Latin America a lot with the legalization of industrial hemp at a allowance of 1% THC threshold. And of course, it's always wonderful to see more countries come online and open up the cultivation, licensing, and just basically accept the benefits that could come from legalizing hemp. But what do you think? We have Javier, of course, the HLG international attorney down there. He wrote a wonderful piece on this recently. But where are you thinking about in terms of how this is going to develop?
Well, so we know, having worked with Javier and his team in helping shape some of this policy, that what the government really wants to see is this become an agricultural commodity, an agricultural focused crop. Not dissimilar from what we heard this afternoon from our friends in Mexico. But yet they turn around and say 1% genetics. Now, there's lots of different ways that 1% THC or the reason to deviate makes sense, particularly in that area of the world. I've never grown anything in Ecuador, but I imagine being in that equatorial, that tropical-like environment, that environment requires different kind of genetics, and those genetics are not going to be stabilized with such low levels of THC, as I understand plant genetics and botany, and that's not my thing. So my point is the 1% could just simply be reflective of the region of the world that these 1% countries are growing, because genetics that would just do well there just happen to have that component. Plus, it increases the efficiency of cannabinoid production, which goes back to folks want to focus on medicine and they want to focus on agriculture. I just hope that folks don't think that they're going to get rich quick just focusing on medicine, because the whole plant needs to develop both sides of that in terms of uses and in industries, particularly in Ecuador with its rich agricultural history and existing export market. The opportunities there, I just hope it doesn't lead to ruin, because they don't realize that even though they can grow more efficient cannabinoid plants with 1%, you've got to focus on the other things too. By the way, Ecuador is one of the larger shrimp producing nations in the world, commercial shrimp. And shrimp, believe it or not, are grown on farms. Probably like far too many things that we put in our bodies these days that we don't want to ask about where it comes from. But shrimp come from farms. Shrimp require protein. What's a great source of protein? Industrial hemp. So that's sort of the basis for the discussions we've had down there, and that Javier's had with his clients, is to say, if you're a shrimp farmer, and there's many of them, and you need a protein source that's reliable, plus, because it has, other nutrients within that would be beneficial to, growing, farming shrimp. And that's a major thing that they're looking at closely, looking at decortication for long fibers for textiles, and ultimately the focus will be on cannabinoids. So we'll see where it goes, but I'm hopeful. It's a wonderful country, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and it's helping to standardize things in that portion of the world.
Well, it's a fascinating fact about the shrimp. It's something you really don't think about often, or until you learn. But it raises a good point, which is that we've seen the export-only model or an export-favored model for a lot of South American and Latin American countries. Do you think that for Ecuador, the focus primarily is for export, or do you think that production for the shrimp, these kinds of examples, there is a market for domestic uses, I guess, of the cannabis plant as a whole?
I would say export for all uses, domestic utilization for the industrial uses, the food uses, and then ultimately the cannabinoid uses. But I think, it's just going to take some time and some study and just understanding what's happening in other countries, and so that these governments that have very little data on, look, we're the United States of America. Our own FDA doesn't have data on CBD and cannabinoids that's reliable, or at least in their mind reliable. We're talking about Latin American countries who this is brand new to, the concept of this. And they're generally underfunded as organizations and entities. So they're capable, certainly, but this is all new. So for them to come around and say, here's how cannabinoids should be distributed within the country of Ecuador, that's a challenge, because they've got to understand it better first. And maybe I'm not giving them enough credit, but I understand the challenges of learning something new, particularly when we see it every day with our state and federal government in the U.S.
Sure. But the wonderful thing to highlight is that all of those uses you can get from a single crop of this plant, which is what makes it so special when you compare it with other agricultural commodities. And hopefully we'll always continue to monitor legalization efforts and policy change all around the world. But Latin America certainly is a place where there just seems to be a lot of interest. We hear it from our guests all the time.
Well, just on that point, something that Luis and I were speaking about just the other day, as we were trying to figure out how do you distinguish country by country in a particular region? When everything's new, where do I go? Do I go to Colombia? Do I go to Brazil? Do I go to Mexico as either an investor or someone who wants to expand or simply sell or distribute products, or maybe cultivate in a lower cost region? Where do I go? So what we've begun to do is to begin to identify, answer the question, why, fill in the blank. Why Ecuador? Why Mexico? We answered part of that today. But to distill that, to say not one is better than the other, but here's the advantages of going here. Ecuador, for example, tax benefits, free trade zone provisions, perfect climate, ultimately already involved in international agricultural commerce. And those are just off the top of your head, what you'd think about would be benefits to doing business in that country. But how do you juxtapose them all against each other? Who has a domestic market? Who doesn't? So those are some of the challenges that we're really pleased that we get to be involved in and sort of trying to help figure out.
Yeah, I like thinking too about not everything is going to be for everybody. Obviously, there's so many uses of this plant, particularly for industrial hemp, just tens of thousands of uses. But you really have to look at a country's pre-existing industries. I kind of think of when we were talking to, I'm gonna butcher his name, but Voltek in the Czech Republic, and you look at the Czech Republic, they have a wonderful automotive industry. That is one of the booming industries there. Well, there's so many ways that industrial hemp can tie into the automotive industry, but maybe some of the other applications of the plant wouldn't necessarily work there. And you start to look at what industries, like shrimp in Ecuador, and you start to plug that plant into what is already there. I think that helps answer the question of why a certain place. Well, what's already there, and how can you make this work with the structures that already exist?
With what's already there. And we heard this earlier. We heard volume basically is critical, and infrastructure is critical. Volume and infrastructure. So if I have an automotive industry, I need to create enough volume of the plant material coupled with the ability to process that plant material so that I can turn to it as a viable alternative price-wise, not just functionality-wise or environmentally friendly-wise, although those type of things add up. But price-wise, I got to be able to make sure I'm comparing apples and apples, or at least close to it. Take hemp grain for a second. Hemp grain costs an enormous amount per pound, per kilo, per ton, compared to other grain that produces, maybe not as intense quantities of omegas and other nutrients, but they're significantly cheaper per unit of measurement. So until that happens, then you really are not going to have the motivation of these folks to swap out something unless there's government incentives or unless truly the farmers can produce enormous amount to lower the cost, which the lowering of the cost doesn't just come with the infrastructure and the volume. It also comes with diversifying the different streams or industries that they service from their singular crop.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting point, and even when we were talking with Memo and Luis earlier, it made me think about, because of course we were talking about NAFTA, we're talking about all the potential for Mexico, and you have to think about all the farmers. You have so many farmers here in the United States. You have a ton of farmers in the southern tier states that border Mexico who just this year were allowed to cultivate and produce industrial hemp for the first time. Now you have people on the other side of the border, farmers down south, who are kind of in that same boat. It's just going to be fascinating it really is, just to sit here and as it all continues to grow and the industry, if we're calling it an industry, continues to develop. It's just there's gonna be so many fascinating things to cover and watch. Bringing it back to the United States for a moment, I want to talk for a second about the New Jersey governor. And Bob, of course, you're from New Jersey, so it's always fun to bring up something that's a little close to you. But he said this week, legalizing marijuana is a no-brainer when it comes to how are we going to get ourselves out of the financial impact of COVID. Just interested in your thoughts. Is it good to hear the New Jersey governor, putting out a positive message for marijuana like that? What do you think?
Well, so first of all, just as a factual matter, it's important to understand this because everybody, if you're not from the area, you don't always understand New Jersey. New Jersey is one of the most diverse places in the United States, but it is 100% the most densely populated state in the country. So, the number of people per square mile exceeds every other state by a long shot. My point is, so New Jersey, to make change, affects a lot of people in a very, very, very short period of time. So it has to be measured out exactly. Now, our new Governor Murphy, I don't know a lot about his background. I haven't lived in New Jersey for some time now, but came in with the understanding that within his first 100 days in office, if I recall properly, he was going to legalize it. And he took all the right steps to do this, built the task force, built out a team, put government resources behind it, but couldn't get it passed through the New Jersey state legislature in Trenton. And in large part because, at least as I've read it, and I don't know the man and I haven't followed his career, he hasn't particularly played politics well with either party. And as a Democrat, you got to have your Democrats on your side. New Jersey has strong Democrats, and it also has strong Republicans, and you're going to have to play that. It doesn't sound like he played the political game very well, and we saw concerns voiced from all sorts of groups, diverse representatives in our state legislature, but many from inner cities and minority communities. And that's another thing a lot of people don't know about New Jersey. There are a number of cities that dwarf many major cities around the U.S., but you'd never heard of them. Or if you have, it's been in passing. Like, everyone's kind of heard of Newark, but there's Newark, large city. Paterson, New Jersey, Perth, Amboy. There's a number of these cities. Camden, New Jersey, we talked about earlier. These are big cities with a lot of people, crumbling infrastructure, and challenges in and of itself. So the leaders of those communities view cannabis or the legalization thereof as a drug and as something that is criminal and just is going to add negative things to that community. And they may not always be wrong, particularly when you consider the policing of it. But the point here is there's missing education. People don't understand what works in other places, what has worked, what the studies show. We've heard this from, frankly, city council members in Denver and even Mayor Hancock himself. Not a fan of legalized marijuana, begrudgingly, but appropriately, is a chief executive of the city and make sure that his city regulates it and licenses it. But he's not in favor of this. He saw in his mind how marijuana led to other things, and or just create. I believe his brother died from a drug overdose, and began with marijuana. I believe that's the story I've heard and read as it relates to Mary Hancock. My point is, it's hard to convince dense city areas and their representatives that adding marijuana will make things better. That's going to be a challenge in any dense population. New Jersey is a great example of that. But yes, should we legalize cannabis right now and tightly regulate it as we've already done, state by state, preferably, by the way, to federal legalization outside of the Safe Banking and the States Act? Should we do that? I think it's an opportunity that if we don't do it, the black market's just going to continue to derive those funds, those dollars, and then marijuana will still be viewed as something that can't benefit so many other people on a legitimate level as medicine. So the economy dictates it. The needs of the people dictate it. We just need leadership on it. And we don't exactly have that in our whoever the next president is, and we kind of know their positions already.
Yes, we do. And I'm glad that you gave that background on New Jersey, because I, who have not been to New Jersey, had no idea. But I guess I just want to ask for a point of clarity. Is it in some part due the population density and the fact that there are a lot of big cities in a state that doesn't have the size of a state out west? Is it kind of some of that sprawl, I guess, if you will, from New York, that you have a major metropolitan area right there, and you've just had people over the years who have kind of gone over to New Jersey? What is it that has driven the development of that city?
Well, so New Jersey is influenced by Manhattan, New York in the northeast, of course, and then in the southwest, it borders up against Philadelphia. So North Jersey and South Jersey are two distinct places. I grew up in southern New Jersey. I went to Rutgers University in the middle of the state and met a bunch of North Jersey. North Jersey people identify with New Yorkers as a general rule. There's exceptions to every rule. South Jersey folks identify with Philadelphians in terms of culture. The dialect, how they speak, it's remarkably different, somebody from outside of Philadelphia in southern New Jersey than someone from New York or outside of it. So all of those things reflect just how densely packed it is and how diverse the state really is. It's almost like a megalopolis between the two cities, because every city's backed up, every little town is backed up a next little town against the next little town. And then there's another city like Atlantic City or, Gloucester, New Jersey. These are, larger cities that are very dense and densely populated that, really shape those things. But the beautiful thing about New Jersey, and New Jersey is truly the Garden State, it's just so densely populated, and that sprawl has, eaten up a lot of that area. But the southeastern part of the state and the northwestern part of the state are just fantastic. In the northwest, there's something called the Delaware Water Gap. It's the Appalachian Mountains where they run through there. It's just scenic and beautiful, and it is mountainous for the East Coast. Not Pennsylvania mountainous, but, not far off. And then in the southeast, it's the Pine Lands, the Pine Barrens, as they call it. By the way, have you ever heard of the Jersey Devil? Not the hockey team, but do you know what the Jersey Devil is?
No, I do not.
All right, so the Jersey Devil is lore in New Jersey when you grow up. The Jersey Devil lives in the Pine Barrens. And there's a story about a town called Batstow where this woman, Mrs. Leeds, had many, many, many children. And apparently the 13th child, immediately upon being born, the wings sprouted out and it flew out the window, and there was sightings ever since. To this day, the Jersey Devil's never been found. I don't know.
It's just one of those things, Bob. The Jersey Devil. You have no idea. No, it's actually it's really, really fun to listen to you talk about New Jersey, and just to just to kind of dig into that a little bit. I certainly appreciate it. I got one last thing before we bring this thing home, and that's a study in Belgium just came out. It's an industry-produced study, but it's a study nonetheless. It says that CBD mouthwash or CBD toothpaste is more effective. So any toothpaste containing cannabinoids is more effective than the regular toothpaste out there, regular mouthwashes. Bob, is this the thing? Is this the domino that's going to set off all of it, or is it significant? I don't know.
It is. It is significant because it continues to send signals for product development for major producers, Fortune 500 companies, enterprise companies. We saw Colgate came out with, I believe 2 months ago, give or take, Colgate toothpaste with hemp seed oil, very deliberately, hemp seed oil, something that's always been approved by the FDA, that has what they call GRAS status, that has been approved as a dietary ingredient, and has recognized nutritional value. No regulatory problems there. You know darn well that Colgate wanted to put CBD in their toothpaste, but running through the regulatory and the legal analysis, the safest thing to do was to potentially build a market strategy by bringing attention to the fact that there's hemp in toothpaste. Why would hemp be in toothpaste? That maybe people become educated about that, and then when the FDA ultimately does create a rule or regulation that allows it, then you've already got recognition as a company that has been a leader putting this stuff in their products to make something better for brushing your teeth, anti-inflammatory. So the gum bleeding, very common in brushing your teeth. Ultimately, antiseptic. So it's going to kill the bacteria that lives under your gums and in and around your teeth, or at least address it. And probably leaves just wonderful smelling breath as well.
This might be the thing that makes the case for just CBD in everything. I don't know. It could be, Bob. It could be.
It is.
Well, between this and the Jersey Devil, I think this is as good of any place to call it for one night. But Bob, it's always a pleasure. We're very happy to hear that Evergreen, the fire's put out, and no sightings of the Jersey Devil here in Colorado.
Not so far. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hoban Minute. Do you have any ideas for episode topics or guests? We would like to hear from you. Reach out to us at media@hoban.law and stay tuned for more on the Hoban Minute.